Okay, good morning. So we're looking at the Gemara now, continuing the Gemara's discussion on the mitzvah of Heseba, the mitzvah of reclining. We established yesterday when we are required to recline, which mitzvahs that we perform, which consumption mitzvahs that we perform throughout the evening of the night of the Seder require that we recline there. So Marar not, considering that Marar is there to remember the time of slavery, and the reclining is the exact opposite, to demonstrate our freedom. Matzah, which is the food we're eating in our Exodus, so that would require reclining. And then when it came to the wine, we had this discussion. A whole evolution of how Rav Nachman communicated, right? We had one tradition that quoted Rav Nachman as saying, wine does not require, the drinking of the 4 cups of, or not the drinking of the 4 cups, the wine at the Seder doesn't require reclining. Another tradition which said the wine at the Seder does require the reclining. We resolved that by saying, well, one statement is about the first 2 cups, and the other statement is about the latter 2 cups, second 2 cups. One statement is about 1 and 2, the second statement is about 3 and 4. And then we say, well, there are 2 ways of understanding that reconciliation. Which of the 2 statements refer to which of the 2 cups? One version is the reclining statement refers to the 3 and 4 because you're already free. 1 and 2, you're still struggling with getting out. You're still describing Gavad Mayinu, we're slaves. And the other opinion says, well, no, when you're describing the Exodus, that's when you recline. Once you're in 3 and 4 and it's done, okay, it's already history. And therefore, the Gemara concludes, Bo idividi bo aseba. These and these, all 4 require the reclining. And that's indeed the halacha, which we'll get to, God willing, chapter 472 in the Shulchan Aruch, Taf Ayin Beis, that indeed matzah and all 4 cups of wine require reclining, and indeed every time we eat matzah, even when we eat matzah with marar, namely the koirach. Now, the Gemara discusses how do we define reclining? What do we define as reclining? Number 1. Number 2, who is obligated to recline? This is where we are. So the word we're looking for is, I think it's pronounced prakton, where there's like a little dalid next to it. The line begins with the word ve'itmar, and it's the last word in that line. Prakton. It'll be a little more than a quarter from the bottom of the page.
Yeah.
Lesson with Aleph 108a. See it?
Yeah.
Okay. Prakton, the person was lying backward, his head up, or his face up. Ponav l'mayla, his face up. Lo yishmei heseba, this does not constitute reclining. That's not considered reclining. I'm just going to state the Gemara, translate literally, and I'll explain to you where the commentaries have a little bit of a discussion about what this means. So reclining or leaning backward with the head face up doesn't constitute heseba. Lo yishmei heseba, that's not called heseba, reclining. Heseba yamin, reclining to the right. Lo yishmei heseba. Lo yishma heseba. This too is not called reclining. This is not the definition of heseba, the required reclining. So we're left with just the left, which is kind of funny. It doesn't say the definition of heseba is to recline to the left. It says leaning back, that doesn't constitute heseba. Leaning to the right, that doesn't either constitute reclining to the right. That doesn't either constitute heseba, which leaves us to the left. Then the Gemara adds, not only that, elashema yakdim, but lest, God forbid, will preface kana leveshet, the windpipe to the food pipe. What is it? Trachea and the ventricle? Esophagus. Which one's which?
Esophagus is the food.
So lest, God forbid, the esophagus become before the trachea. The other disakana will come to a danger. End quote from the Gemara. choke. That last statement, and not only this, but it'll also cause danger because it might go to your the food might go to your windpipe. Of which of the two cases is it talking about? Leaning to the left, leaning to the right, I'm sorry, or leaning back? Of which of the two would it be? This is a discussion Rashi Rashbam. Now, seemingly, what does it come down to? So, when it comes to leaning backwards, head face up, why is that not called reclining? What does it give any reason? It says that doesn't constitute reclining. Rashbam is silent, so is Rashi. Why it's not called reclining? Why is leaning backward not called reclining? But says Tosfos, this is not the proper manner of eating.
Used to have those divans, right?
That's right.
And
so it's not
either they were leaning. I don't know which direction.
Exactly. So this is not the people don't lean backward when they eat. They were leaning on their side. Okay, so the first statement is clear. Leaning back doesn't constitute leaning, doesn't constitute reclining, because it's not the way people eat. Okay. Now, why isn't leaning to the right considered reclining?
That would be because of the reasoning stated there.
Oh, so you're suggesting, and this would be rational.
Reclining is not bad.
This would be logic. Reclining backward doesn't constitute reclining because it's not the way people eat. Reclining to the right doesn't constitute reclining because it's dangerous. Now let's look at the Gemara's phrasing carefully. Hasebes yamin lo shmei hasebel. Reclining to the right doesn't constitute reclining. V'lo not only that, elashema yakdim, unless God forbid you choke. So then that's again.
Not the only reason.
Because the Gemara says not only that, it would indicate that actually inherently leaning to the right is not considered reclining for whatever reason. And then besides for that, it's also dangerous. Right? That's what it would seem like. So reconciling that is a little bit difficult when it comes to where this is to where how you define this.
Say somebody did it, and if it's only because of due to choking, then would it still constitute
exactly
reclining?
That's right. If the issue exactly,
or is it really
there's two different
for other reasons?
In other words, like this: if it was only the second reason for choking, you would say it does constitute reclining. It's just a bad idea,
right?
But now he's saying it doesn't constitute reclining for whatever reason,
and
additionally, it's also dangerous. Right. Okay, so Rashi actually does not comment neither on why leaning backwards is not considered reclining, nor why leaning to the right is not considered reclining. Rashi doesn't comment on either of those two. He does say that this statement, and not only that, but it's also dangerous, is not referring to reclining to the right, but actually referring to reclining to the back.
Oh, okay.
Now, that's all Rashi says. That actually this statement, v'lo yo'od, not only that, but it's dangerous, is a reference to reclining backward. Okay, so what's perhaps Rashi trying to say? What Rashi's saying is, okay, leaning to the left, leaning to the right is not considered reclining because it's not the right way of doing it. Everybody knows that. Leaning to the right is not considered reclining because it's dangerous, obviously.
You said right, fine.
Leaning backwards is not considered reclining because no one does that. Leaning to the right is not considered reclining because it's dangerous. Everybody knows that.
Yeah.
But not only that, even leaning back is considered dangerous. In addition to the leaning back, right? That's how Rashi would learn it.
Seems how the Gemara means.
That's how Rashi would learn the Gemara. Rashbam, however, says no. It doesn't follow. Because the v'lo yo'od, not only that, but it's dangerous, comes after the Gemara statement that leaning to the right doesn't constitute reclining. If Rashi was correct, that when the Gemara says not only that, but it's also dangerous, it's referring to leaning back, then this is how the Gemara should have flowed. Leaning back is not considered reclining. Additionally, it's dangerous. And leaning to the right is also not considered reclining. Instead of putting the statement, not only that, it's dangerous, after the decision to tell you not to lean to the right.
Right. It doesn't seem to flow.
It doesn't seem to flow. So therefore, says Rashbam, okay, leaning backwards is not considered reclining. Everybody knows that because it's not the way you eat. He doesn't say that, but I'm inserting that from Tosfos. That seems obvious. It seems obvious. Leaning back is not considered reclining.
For us, but in
those days, no one had back.
Because that's how people ate.
That's right.
No one's disputing.
That's right. Now, why is leaning to the right not considered reclining? Not because of danger, because according to Rashbam, the Gemara adds that as a secondary reason. Not only that, it's also dangerous. So why is it not considered reclining to lean to the right? Says Rashbam, because you need your right arm to eat. Practical. But not only that, it's also dangerous. And therefore, if you're a lefty, don't lean to your left, don't lean to your right. even though for you, you're a left. He doesn't say this, but I'm spelling it out. He doesn't say this last part about the lefty. I'm spelling it out.
No,
I'm spelling it out.
That makes sense. Yeah.
I'm spelling it out. He doesn't say that. What he does say is leaning to the right is not considered leaning because you need your right hand to eat.
Yeah.
And additionally, it's also dangerous.
So even lefties don't do it.
That's right. So the Gemara flows. Now I'm adding that not only that actually tells us that lefty shouldn't do it either.
Yeah. Right.
So it's more difficult for lefties. We apologize, but it's dangerous. And that would explain why the Gemara actually has to give a second reason for the right. Leaning backward, the Gemara only needs to give one reason. It doesn't count as leaning because obviously you don't lean backward. But leaning to the right, the Gemara might have to give two reasons. Again, Rashbam doesn't say this about the lefty. I'm adding this to give more flavor to it.
Flavor.
Yeah. What's the
We're
word?
eating now.
What?
We're eating.
Exactly.
Talking about eating.
Leaning to the right is not considered leaning because you need your right arm to eat. Additionally, it's also dangerous. That's what Rashbam says. Levi is adding, well, maybe that extra reason helps to tell you that even if you're left-handed, you shouldn't be leaning to your right. You shouldn't be leaning to your right. Because you might argue, well, for me, I need my left hand to eat, so what constant leaning actually would be to the right? Says Rashbam, maybe hypothetically you're correct, but it's dangerous. Because even if you're left-handed, your windpipe is still on your left. Okay. So this is the Gemara's discussion about what constitutes reclining. And essentially, I don't have a full answer for this, but maybe when we open the Shulchan Aruch, we'll get better. But it's just, the Gemara doesn't say it as leaning. Reclining is defined by leaning to the left. It goes in the negative. Lying back, that doesn't constitute as reclining. Lying to the right, that doesn't constitute as reclining. Leaving us with the conclusion that the left is the way to go. But the Gemara doesn't actually say it that way.
And forward too.
Yeah, the Gemara doesn't discount forward. I guess this forward is even reclining forward is even more obvious than reclining back as a non-entity.
Right.
It's even more obvious than leaning back. Because leaning back you could do on your divan. It's not the usual way.
So the question is why doesn't the Gemara say it, or the Mishnah say it right? That the way it's being used for the left.
So here's my.
It's almost like you have to infer from the negative.
Yeah. So my again, maybe we'll get better at this when we see the Shulchan Aruch. My initial thoughts are, the reclining business is the point is to demonstrate your freedom. So it's very subjective and it should be your comfort. So all the Gemara is telling you is what you don't do. Everything else, do as you will, just as long as you're comfortable. Now, the Gemara also doesn't say, do you need a pillow or not? The Gemara also doesn't say how far to your left you should lean, how far to the left you should recline. Like when it comes to Moedim, for example, bowing down before Hashem at Moedim, right? It says how much you have to bow to the point that every single one of your vertebrae get bent a little bit. Every one of the
Vertebra.
The pieces on the spine.
Vertebrae.
A vertebrae, yeah. So until each one is bent, right? So when you have these movements in Torah, in halacha, like everything else, it's very precise as to how you're supposed to do the action. But when it comes to reclining, the whole point is you demonstrate your freedom. So get comfortable.
Yeah, I would even say that.
So it's supposed to be subjective. All the Gemara is telling you is what doesn't count as it.
Right. I think
that's perhaps why it's in the negative, because it doesn't want to tell you definitively what you should be doing, because you're supposed to be doing what's comfortable. But we'll tell you what doesn't count. Maybe.
I would even go one step more and say that it doesn't want to follow the definition of freedom to you as a demonstration of, well, you have the freedom to choose or to decide how you.
Okay, in the broader sense, the freedom is defined by being a Torah observant Jew, right? In Ben Chayrin El Misha Torah, there's no one free other than the one who studies Torah, right? So there is that definition, but in terms of your comfort level, yes, you're correct. Torah doesn't want to say what your comforts are
or what you should do in this case, and maybe in this
case,
giving you a little bit of
choose your comfort. That's the whole point.
As an expression of freedom.
That's the whole point. We're just going to tell you what's not. This isn't the usual way of doing it. This is not good because you need your right hand to eat. And additionally, be wary of your health. Don't joke. So maybe that's why, yeah. Okay, now the Gemara gets to who is required to lean. Says the Gemara at a little hay. Isha Eitzel Baila, a woman in the presence of her husband. Loi boy seba, does not require reclining.
Woman.
A woman in presence of her husband.
Oh, okay.
We'll learn that when the Shulchan Aruch about women in general, but women in the presence of her husband, the way the Gemara says it. Now, the reason for this is, as the Gemara says, well, certainly the Gemara and Halacha might not be so popular in 2020, whatever, 2023, 24, but gender roles are definitely a thing in Torah, clearly, right? There are different mitzvahs that are for men, different mitzvahs that are for women, and the same thing is true in the husband-wife relationship. And the gender roles are designed based on the needs of men and women in general. We're going to see in a moment exceptions to that rule, but for men and women in general, and the role for men and women in general is men have a lack of self-confidence, so they require their wives to prop them up and compliment them and make them put them on a pedestal. I'm saying it somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but it's also true. It's also true, right? That's how men are. We need like props and things to hold us up. So, and our wives are a big role of that, right? They're always compliment us and cherish us and put us on a pedestal. Wow, you're the leader of the home. It's very important to the relationship and to a man's sense of self. And conversely, the Gemara doesn't discuss it here, but conversely, woman needs to feel like she's provided for, she's loved, she's cared for, she has a protector, right? And that's the way the man has to treat woman, like the prized possession that he's protecting and leading and guiding, not guiding, I shouldn't say guiding, but providing for and protecting, comfort, safety, and so on, a listening ear, right? So the husband provides that safety for her, and she provides that self-esteem and that confidence to him. So in that regard, therefore, considering that her husband is there, and she's supposed to be propping him up, so the idea is that she watches his reclining as the leader of the home, and she stands, as it were, in awe of his presence and sits without reclining, which would be a demonstration of her throwing off the yoke of her responsibilities, right? Which would undermine the husband's position, so to speak. Right? That's how. This is my elaborated version of Rashbam's commentary. Rashbam just says because the awe of her husband is present, and therefore, and she's like subject to her husband's awe, and therefore she doesn't recline. That's all Rashbam says. I'm extrapolating from that a more broader understanding of how Torah sees the gender roles in a marriage. So she doesn't recline. Yeah, Rashbam also quotes another thing that like a woman's because of her modesty, she doesn't just drink wine and guzzle, which is kind of what the experience of leaning to the left, leaning when drinking. Okay, but now though this is the general rule, of course there are exceptions to the rule. Not every marriage, not every husband and wife have that dynamic, and therefore, in Isha Chashovehi, if she's a woman of prestige, so she herself stands in that position, then but she requires reclining. Because she herself is the kind of woman who is at a leader position and not in the classic gender roles of supporting her husband as the leader. And if she's in that leader position, she's Isha Chashuva, she's a woman of repute, a woman of status. Status is a wrong word because it makes it seem like the other woman is not of status. But Chashuva means like special, or she has that quality that would put her not as a supporter to the leader, but the leader. Then she does require reclining. More continues. Now, Ben Eitzel Aviv, a son in the presence of his father. Boy Heseba requires reclining, even though the father is the leader of the house, and the awe and reverence of his father should be upon him as well, just like a woman. But nonetheless, it's not as much, says Rashbam. Lo have a cup of kolkach. He's not so subject to his father's leadership, because he's being trained to, God willing, want to be a leader of his own family one day. I'm adding that part, but so it would seem, right? The father wants to train his son to be in that position, God willing, one day, right? That's the greatest nachas. To one day see my child lead a home, at least as good, if not better than I am. Now the question becomes, the following he asked of them, right? So we have the word boy, which means it's an inquiry. The questioner has no agenda, and it's he asked of them, which means someone came into the study hall somewhere at some point and posed the following inquiry, and the discussion ensued. Talmud Rabbi, a student in the presence of his teacher, what's the halacha? To what degree does a student have the awe and reverence of his teacher upon him? To what degree is the reverence of his teacher upon him? To the degree that a woman would be looking at her husband with that ultimate reverence and saying, "You're the leader," or like a child, who maybe the teacher actually wants to prop this student up, that the student become a leader. In the same way a father would do that for the son, and if the son doesn't have that same level of reverence. So where does the student fall in terms of his relationship with his teacher? So it says the Gemara, as someone in the study hall presented, Tashma, come and listen to the following words. Amar Abaye said, so someone in the study hall is telling us, I have the answer. I heard from Abaye the following, or I heard in the name of Abaye the following. Havina, ki havinan beimar, when we were in the presence of master being Rabbi being the teacher of Abaye, the teacher of Rava. I think even, right, didn't Rabbi adopt Abaye? Anyway, Abaye said when we were in the presence of Rabba, Mar, master, Zaginan Abirchet Hadadi. We would each lean, each of us students, in the presence of Rabba, we would each lean on the shoulders of our friend. Each of us would lean on our friend's shoulder. That's how we would lean to the left. So it wasn't a full reclining, seemingly, but to whatever degree we could, we were, because we're obviously all crowded around the table, wanting to partake and observe the Seder of our Grand Master Rabba. But they would lean on each other's shoulders to the left. But then Abaye continued, Yasin al Rabbi Yosef. When later on we transferred to the yeshiva of Rabbi Yosef, because Rabbi was the leader before Rabbi Yosef, and Rabbi Yosef took him over. The Gemara tells a story elsewhere. On Marlon, Rabbi Yosef told us, you don't have to lean. Why? Because Moira Rabach to Moira Shemayim. The Mishnah says, based on the verse, that the fear of one's teacher should be equal to the fear of heaven. Their teacher being the one who brings them the word of God, the teacher teaches them Torah. So through the teacher, they have their relationship with Hashem, and therefore their fear of their teacher, their awe and reverence they have for the teacher should be like as if their awe and reverence of heaven. And therefore, in the presence of their teacher, not like a woman to her husband who has to, because the awe is upon her, and therefore she's propping him up or whatever. But simply because you're standing in the presence of your source of relationship with Hashem, you're standing in the presence of your Torah, you stand like a soldier. You don't recline, which is a demonstration of your expansion. In the presence of your teacher, you stand like this. That's the halacha. What constitutes a teacher is a good question. Whether someone you just learn from every now and again, I'm not so sure it counts as a teacher. There's a certain level that has to reach, and we'll explore a little bit of that. But in the presence of the Rebbe, for example, when they were at the Rebbe Seder, they would not lean. Only the Rebbe would lean. Nobody else would lean. Being the position of Rabbi. Rabbi was, Rashbam uses the word malach. He ruled. He was of Yosef as well. They were like the exilach. They were the leaders of the yeshiva, much after the exilach. But they were certainly the head of the academy. Someone on that level, no leaning in his presence, and indeed by the Rebbe they would not. Chassidim would not.
What about if the leader instructs his members of the Seder to leave, and that overrides that halacha on this one?
We'll get into that Shulchan Aruch, I believe. Remember correctly. I didn't read through all the Shulchan Aruch in detail, but at a cursory reading, I believe it's in there.
Popped in my head.
Yeah, if he gives permission.
Because I was just thinking, like, if the rabbi had a Seder at his house, she does
Yes, I don't know that the
instruct me.
Right, I don't know if the rabbi would constitute this.
Learning.
Yeah, I don't know that the rabbi would be halacha qualified to be this. Talking about next level of rabbi. Like as I said, that's the example of the Rebbe.
Right.
It has to be someone on the level of Rabbi of Yosef, people who are like the head of the academy. I imagine.
Oh yeah, I wasn't even thinking. Because the
Yeah.
Rabbi didn't instruct them to do it.
I actually imagine that if they ever instructed Chassidim to lean, they wouldn't.
Oh, even if.
I imagine they wouldn't even do so. I imagine someone who's an elder chassid more
Right.
would say something to Rebbe like, the halacha is, or like, we consider you, Rebbe, to be at a level that we don't have to, or phrase it like that in such a way.
Makes sense. Just have piety.
Yeah. Kind of like the way when people had private
Deference.
audience with the Rebbe, when Chassidim had private audience with the Rebbe,
Stand.
they would stand. And there were times when they would offer people a seat and they would just continue standing, and then everyone would just continue they would talk, accepting. Sometimes they would insist that they sit, but other times they would accept that they are performing this kind of halacha of reverence, and they would continue. Right? There's actually halachas about this that our Rebbe is not allowed to forgo his that the halachas that are in his honor, because it's not his honor, it's the honor of the Torah he teaches and the honor of the God that he represents. So it's not his to give away.
Yeah,
right. So I don't know necessarily. But again, I think it's in the Shulchan Aruch. We'll see if we get there. I don't remember. Okay, concluding this discussion on who's required to lean, and then tomorrow we'll get to the Shulchan Aruch. Meisvei, the following contradiction was raised. Right, we have Meisvei means we have a quote from a source greater than the one talking. So here it's Abaye talking, who said that in the presence of a teacher you don't need to lean. Abaye, of course, is a scholar of the Gemara's era, and not maybe the third or fourth generation of the Gemara's era. Now we're about to quote Mishnaic text. So Meisvei, we're quoting a source greater than you, which reads, quote, Im hakol adam meisiv. One leans in the presence of anyone.
One does.
One reclines, eat in the presence of anyone. Va'afilo Talmud Pesachim, even a student and a teacher in the presence of his teacher. This contradicts Abaye's statement, who quoted from Rav Yosef, who also is of the Gemara era, who said you don't have to lean because the presence of your teacher is like the presence of God. You're supposed to treat the presence of your teacher like with the same reverence that you would the presence of Hashem. And here we have a Mishnaic text which says you recline in the presence of anyone, including your teacher. To which the Gemara explains, Kitanya hi. When that statement was taught, Bishulaya de Nagri, a teacher who literally teaches someone how to do someone had to teach them how to be a carpenter. But it means you're a teacher of craft, not a creature of Torah. In the presence of your teacher of your craft, with all the reverence in the world, with all the due reverence you're supposed to give to someone who teaches you how to make a living, you still lean in his presence. Right? Final statement. He asked of them. So again, we're back in the study hall. Someone presents the following question, perhaps at the same time, perhaps at different occasions. But he asked of them, so someone poses the following inquiry in front of the student, in front of the study hall. Shamish, an attendant, a waiter, what's the halacha? Does he required to lean to the left or not? Answers the Gemara, Tashma, come and listen. So someone in their presence says, come and listen, I have a text, or I have a tradition, a statement that would resolve your question. Rabbi Levi said, Rabbi Levi is of the first generation of the Gemara. He said, quote, Hashamish, an attendant, Sha'acha kazayis matzah, who eats a kazayis, which is the minimum amount of matzah, Kishu Mesiv, when he is reclining, Yotza fulfilled his obligation. End quote from Rabbi Levi. And therefore we can resolve Mesiv if he's reclining, he does fulfill his obligation. Loi Mesiv, if he doesn't recline, he didn't fulfill his obligation. Shmamina, from here we can derive Boya Seba, that even an attendant, a waiter, requires to recline to fulfill his obligation. Concludes the Gemara, Shmamina, indeed we can derive from here. So in conclusion, wife in the presence of her husband doesn't recline unless she has that status, which she herself as leader, then she reclines. Teacher, a son in the presence of a father does recline. Student in the presence of a teacher who teaches them Torah at that high level, no reclining.
Teaches someone a craft.
Teaches a student in the presence of a teacher who taught him a craft, yes, reclining. An attendant, yes, reclining. Attendant, a waiter. This is what we have so far, and God willing, we will unpack all that in the Shulchan Aruch tomorrow, all the laws of reclining. Right? Because there's three subjects we covered. When to recline, what constitutes reclining, and who reclines. Those are the three subjects we had. God willing, we'll unpack all of those in the Shulchan Aruch in much greater detail. And after that, we'll do some highlights of the Rebbe's famous talk about how you define the mitzvah of Haseba, which we spoke about yesterday a little bit. Is it an independent mitzvah that happens to be expressed at different times? Or is it a mitzvah that emerges from those mitzvahs, that the mitzvah of matzah requires reclining? Or is it reclining that requires you to do so when you're eating matzah? Which one manifests from which? And that, God willing, we'll also explore. And as I mentioned already, the Rebbe says that both are true. And we're going to learn what will be the practical ramifications of these two ways of thinking about it when we get to God willing. So this is the trajectory over the next couple of days, or however long, maybe a week or so. Okay, wonderful day.
Good day.